Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Zagat Guest Chefs at Google. My name is Jason Crane, and I'm a chef here on campus, and it is my proud pleasure to welcome Marcy Masumoto today from Masumoto Family Farms in Delray, California. They are a local family-owned peach grower and farmer, and they also do nectarines and raisins and some other interesting things too. And we'll get to talking about that, but I'd like to start out by just letting Marcy talk a little bit about what goes on out there in her own words, and maybe do a little reading from the book, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
Absolutely, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. What a delight to be on this campus and enjoying the world through the view of Google. I love it, anyhow. My pleasure. So my name is Marcy Masumoto. I am part of the Masumoto family farm. My husband's grandfather, all his grandparents immigrated from Japan, turn of the century, 100 and some years ago, and settled in the Central Valley near Fresno. World War II came around. Japanese Americans were relocated, to relocation camps, and my husband's father chose to return to the Central Valley to farm. And it wasn't until 1948, then after World War II, that the family actually had enough money to purchase the land themselves, and we actually live on that farm that the family bought so many years ago. Since then, about 20 years later, they purchased an adjacent 40 acres. So at this point, the Masumoto family owns, we are a small farm. We have an 80-acre farm, family run and operated. We live on this farm. My kids grew up on the farm. So my daughter is taking over the farm now. She's 28 years old and had made the decision while she was in college that she wanted to come back to the farm. She realized that this was her life, this was her passion, and you can see a picture of Nikiko there, but she is taking over the farm, and so she will be the fourth generation working the land. We grow grapes and peaches, about 25 acres of tree fruit. We have 7 different varieties of peaches, 3 varieties of nectarines. And then the balance of our land is 2 things at this point. We grow Thompson seedless grapes for raisins. And then we also have some land that we're giving a rest right now, especially with the drought and the lack of water. We've for a couple years now, we are fallowing some of the land and returning it to some natural landscape, which is certainly beneficial for an organic farm. So that's a little bit about the history of our farm. The book that we're celebrating today was a joint effort between the 3 of us, my daughter, my husband, and myself. Came out just last June. It's called The Perfect Peach, Recipes and Stories from the Masumoto Family Farm. Probably a little bit that I should add is that books are not new to our family. This was the first book that my daughter and I were involved with writing, but my husband's also a writer, so he's published a number of books. Maybe some of you have heard of some of them, but his first book that was published here in the U.S. was Epitaph for a Peach, and that was a literary piece about saving the family farm. And that book, years ago, was honored as a Julia Child Cookbook Award winner in the literary food category. No recipes in that book. My husband does not cook. My daughter and I are the cooks. And so we did the other part of this book. So it's a combination. So that's kind of a little bit about us. Let me just share just a tiny bit about this book and, what it is that we're here to talk today about. The book we called The Perfect Peach, because I think for those of you that enjoy fruit, you're always in search of that elusive, perfect fruit. Whether you're in season, out season, you're at the store, you're at home, if you have a memory of a great tasting peach, you're always in search of that great tasting peach. So let me just read just a short passage from the beginning of the book. And this is a passage my daughter wrote called Learn to Love a Peach. We are in love with peaches. This peach love, and consequently this book, is not really about perfection, or rather it is, but it's a different kind of perfect. A perfect dressed in hand-me-down clothes that pass from generation to generation. Maybe there's no pre-existing perfect peach. Instead, maybe a peach becomes perfect when it reminds us of the deep connections that are already present when we eat one. Maybe a perfect peach wakes us up through our senses to listen, appreciate, and champion the ways in which we are interdependent as farmers, workers, cooks, and eaters. This is perfection in process that I seek. So that gives you a little flavor of this book.
Great, that was a nice reading. So just get into our Q&A. The title of the book is called The Perfect Peach. Can you break that down and talk about what that really means? And I think you started a little bit with your reading right there, but just elaborate a little bit on what that means to you and your family.
Exactly. So to us, the perfect peach is not just that little round ball of flesh, but it's also about the story and the history and the place that it came from. And so for us, as family farmers, we feel that it's really important that we try to connect our fruit and our place with those that enjoy it. So the perfect peach is maybe, in a way, part of your imagination, but in another way, I think something that we seek to enjoy. And part of our effort here is not only sharing the story about the family and the farm and the practices, but then how can each of us use these peaches other than just eating out of hand? The fact that we love peaches, we're home cooks, we're not trained chefs, but we're home cooks, and we love peaches, and we have certainly a large supply of peaches. And if you have access to good fruit, whether it's in your neighbor's backyard or you have a favorite farmer at a farmer's market that you enjoy picking up your fruit, we would like to have you celebrate that fruit in every type of dish as well as year-round if you have that opportunity.
Excellent. So you brought this up a little earlier with your husband's first book, and in part of the beginning of that book, you talk about this being a literary cookbook.
Right.
You want to explain a little bit about what you mean by this being a literary cookbook?
Sure. Some of our people that we've come across have said that they've actually taken their cookbook to bed with them at night and read a chapter or so before falling asleep. And the whole idea of a literary cookbook, it's not just a collection of recipes. It's more than that. It's the stories, the backstory of not only the recipe itself, which each have head notes, explaining, where did the inspiration come from this recipe, or is it a family recipe? But also tying together through a narrative the story about the farm. If I could share a little bit about even the table of contents and the chapters. So we started with a peach primer, wanting to share with others what we've learned over the years of raising peaches. So what is it about peaches? How do you pick a peach? When is it ripe? What are the varieties? That kind of thing. But then there's the next chapter is about thirst and sweat. This is a chapter about beverages and stories about work, and that life on the farm is not just bucolic and that romantic image that some people have. It's a lot of work. And so what goes along with work? Well, it's sweat. And how do you quench that sweat? It's with beverages. So we've got a great selection of beverages there too. Then we've got a chapter at the table, which includes savory dishes and stories about family farming. So we've got a great variety of savories. You can't have peach recipes and peach stories without sweet dreams or sweets. So this is a section about sweet dishes and peach pleasure. So we love the metaphor of peaches and love. And then finally, Harvest Memories is the last section in which we include stories about legacy, but also recipes about preserves. How do you enjoy that peach? If it's got a short season, how do you enjoy that the rest of the year? And part of our goal there was to share with others the simple truths about how to preserve your food, whether it's freezing or canning or drying. So this is kind of a little narrative through the book.
Yeah, it was interesting to read. I haven't finished it yet, but looking through it, getting prepared for this, it was interesting being able to see the stories and how the book went along and how the recipes matched and went along with the stories, and it wasn't just an encyclopedia of how you could use a peach every way possible.
Exactly. It's not everything that is known in the world about peaches. It's not an encyclopedic type book, but it's through the eyes of the growers and the eaters and the home cooks. And I think one of the fun elements about the book is the photography also, that we purposefully had the photographer taking images not only of the dishes, but also of the farm and what was going on the farm throughout the year. So we have some images. I should have that one labeled here, but images even of thinning peaches and harvesting, images during the winter time when the trees are dormant and they're resting. And I would like to think that they're images that also help educate our readers and our eaters of what is happening on the farm year-round.
This is not really a question, but just to follow up on that, you talk in there a little bit of having agenda to try to get everyone to love peaches, and I think what we just talked about right there and what you were saying goes along those lines of being your agenda of this book to, get people to understand the life of the peach and everything that goes into the farming, from your family to your workers to everything that goes into bringing these wonderful peaches to market.
Exactly. That it's both a labor of love as well as pure labor that goes into producing peaches. We happen to be a certified organic farm, and so our practices we strive to be sustainable, to raise fruit that's environmentally correct, that's not damaging the earth, that's profitable, because if it's not profitable, we're not going to be in business. And that's also socially just. And part of that is, how do we deal with our workers and our laborers? And those are real issues. What are the immigration policies, and how do those impact the food that we eat every day? So it's more than just a peach.
Well, while we're talking about organics, can you talk a little bit about what it takes to be an organic farm? And since you guys have been an organic farm since the 80s, a little bit of the differences that go into what it was back then to what it entails now.
Sure. Wow. When we transitioned to organic, we were kind of in the early wave. There were few people doing organics, and those that were definitely on the fringes. So in the early years, we were developing the methods. Of course, generations ago, almost all farming was organic, but then through the industrial era, everything switched over to what we now call conventional farming, where it was common practice to be using pesticides and herbicides. And so as we were transitioning to becoming organic, we, along with some of our neighbors, had to figure it out. How do you live without chemicals? For me, it was an obvious decision. I live on this farm. We have grapes growing about 20 feet from the front door of our house, and raising children there, it was an obvious thing for me to not want to have chemicals in the front yard. And on a conventional farm, if you're applying pesticides or herbicides, you have to post these signs, with the skull and crossbones on it, that indicate you've sprayed, or that the chemicals are there, and that to tell you not to enter the field for so many days. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got a toddler here, that as far away as the window there, can't cross the line because there's chemicals being sprayed there, and it just didn't make sense. So at that early stage, we, along with some of our other a handful of friends that were growers, and some researchers from the Cooperative Extension Service and other sources, the universities, we're creating ways to make organic farming viable for the types of products or crops that we grew. So it's been a long time. I mean, this was before Whole Foods markets, right? Today, especially in urban areas, everyone's aware of Whole Foods, and Whole Foods kind of has grown up along with us. We were an early grower for Whole Foods. Back in the day, we were one of their first national producers of peaches, and so as they've grown, we've grown also. But they weren't around our first couple years. We had to develop markets. Our first year of organics, all of our fruit went to baby food. It was to organic baby foods, and that's kind of what got us through over the hump, I would say, from conventional farming to organics. But it's been a long haul, and I think at this point, we think we know what we're doing now.
Yeah, I guess the skull and crossbones right by your front door isn't going to really attract anyone but maybe pirates to come visit you. So yeah, maybe
pretty scary thing when you think about it.
So while we're talking about the not using chemicals, I was reading that you guys use pheromones as part of your abatement to insects on the farm. Can you talk a little bit about how pheromones play into the organic mix?
Yeah, pheromones are kind of a mysterious thing, and when we started applying pheromones, it was our education to our kids about sex education, So pheromones are the scent of the insects that would thrive, for example, in a peach orchard. So there's a couple different insects that damage peaches, and you chemically create this scent that's applied to a little plastic strip that we hang in the trees. Every couple months you hang them in the trees. And what that does is it emits the scent so that the male, like male moth, is confused. It's the scent of the female. He is attracted to this, so he never actually finds the real female. So mating doesn't occur, so eggs aren't laid, so worms don't grow, and you have clean fruit. So it's kind of it's an interesting cycle. But actually a place where technology has really played a major role on the family farm.
Yeah, that's super interesting, breaking the life cycle versus trying to kill individual.
Yeah, if you wait till you see the worm, it's too late, because you've got lots of worms everywhere. So you want to prevent that from even happening.
One of the lines at the beginning of a chapter in there from you was start with great and end with great. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Oh, sure. I'd be delighted. If you are, say you want to make a peach pie, of course, I think in most of your minds you'll say, I want to make a really good peach pie. Well, if you want to make a good peach pie, you've got to start with a good peach and good primary ingredients. With any dish and any recipe. I mean, why would you want to start with mediocre? I mean, if you start with mediocre, then you're going to be adding sugar and salt and all these other things to give it flavor, which in the end doesn't really end up with a better tasting dish. It ends up with something that looks like peach but may not taste like peach. So the idea that start with great, if you have access to great food, here in California we're so lucky, just so lucky to have access to so many different types of produce. And so why not? We really don't have any excuse to not start with good, fresh ingredients.
Awesome. Can you talk to me a little bit about what your responsibilities are at the farm? I know you guys are a family farm, and I'm sure everyone has their own responsibilities out there to make sure it runs. Can you talk a little bit about what you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I have two roles on the family farm. One is to make sure the farm is viable year after year after year after year, which means that I actually work off the farm as well as on the farm. So I am really lucky that the job that I have, I'm involved with the education world. So I work full-time during the academic year, and during the summertime I only have to work limited schedule so that I have time to work on the farm when we have the most work going on the farm. Now that doesn't limit my responsibilities year-round. I mean, as an owner and a business person, we're involved with management and financial decisions year-round. And part of what I do is I help select fruit varieties because I'm the cook, right? So if I want a peach that's going to hold up well in canning, then I want to be responsible for helping make that decision. So peach selection, that during the harvest season, I am responsible for packing fruit. We do specialty packs for high-end grocers and restaurants. And so actually, my daughter and I are out there packing fruit every day throughout the summer. That's our job. And we feel really passionate about that because we want the eaters, the consumers, to have the best quality fruit. And the best quality fruit is something that's ripe or tree ripened and not picked when it was green or hard as a rock and may never ripen correctly. So my biggest job during the summer is packing fruit, actually, and testing recipes when I can.
Excellent. So while we're talking about this, talk about what it's like to actually own a farm, when it goes into that a little bit, and then what it's like working with your family all the time and being out there on a family farm.
I'm curious, how many of you work with your relatives? Not too many, a few, not too many. It's a little different feature when you are working with your spouse, working with your kids, or your children are working with you. I mean, right at this phase, my daughter is learning all the practices of farming and working with her dad every day, day in and day out. And think about it. If you're working with your parents, some days are great, and some days, it's still dad. So, the family dynamics, I think overall it's pretty amazing. We also have a son. I don't want to minimize the fact that Nikiko has a sibling. Koryo is a little younger than she is. He's still in college and hasn't exactly decided what he wants to do yet, but he's really happy just helping at this point. And our daughter Nikiko is certainly committed to being the one responsible to ensure that the farm goes on. So working with your family is a totally different type of responsibility. Farming also can happen every day of the year. The nice thing about fruit is that the trees go dormant during the winter, and so the work isn't as intense during the winter. I grew up on a dairy, and for me, we had to work every day of the year regardless, because you still have to feed the livestock or you still have to milk the animals. And so when I met Mas, it was like, oh, what a treat. You get winters off, So that allows him a little more time to do the paperwork, the finances, the planning, and then some writing on the side. So owning a farm is more than just the business, though, because we're a family farm. We don't have the corporate mentality. We do take things personally. We know our workers personally. We know every corner of the property and know which trees are going to produce a little more and which ones need a break this year, or which part of the vineyards need extra fertilizer or something like that. That because we're small enough, we can have an intimate relationship with every part of our farm and understand what its needs are. So.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about peaches for a minute here.
Absolutely.
That's what we're here for, right? So I'm going to have a couple questions. What are the differences between yellow flesh and white fleshed peaches?
Okay. I know that somebody talked to me earlier about had a penchant for white peaches. Happens to be the Masumotos like yellow flesh peaches more. What I like about yellow flesh peaches is that they have an acid-sweet balance, that there's a combination, where a white flesh peach does not have the acid. So it's the sweet. You have only the sweet flavor. Depending on the variety, the textures might be a little different, but the primary difference between the yellow fruit and the white fruit is that acid content in the yellow.
Interesting. Can you tell me about some of the varietals that you grow on the farm?
Sure. We happen to grow a lot of older varieties. Today, if you go to the market, you probably notice that in most markets, they're only identified as yellow or white. And little do most people know that, for example, the yellow fruit, there are probably 50 different varieties of yellow flesh fruit. And the variety will dictate when it's available, when it's ripe. We have 7 different varieties of peaches. So our first variety is called the Spring Lady, and that will be harvested mid to end of May. And then our last variety is the Alberta, which comes usually around the 1st of August. And we've got several varieties in between. So some of the varieties that we have, maybe some of you have heard of the Suncrest peach. That's an older variety that my husband first wrote about in his book Epitaph for a Peach. But it's a very tangy, great tasting, out of hand eating peach. It's great for a salad or great for something fresh. Doesn't hold up well at all if you're trying to cook with it. It'll actually just falls apart. Whereas the Alberta peach, for example, which is another older heirloom type variety, is great under heat. When you add heat, it just gets nice and firm and maintains its shape and its texture, and is great for like pies or something, or even canning. So. You want to know more about varieties? Was that?
Yeah,
I'm trying to.
Yeah, I think we'd all be a little more
I'm jumping around here in my head a little bit, but let's see. So we have. I should look at the Magnificent 7, we call them. Okay. It would be a good test of me just to name them all off. Though we have Spring Lady, we have Gold Dust, which is another older variety that's very tender. Almost looks like a very large apricot. If you think of an apricot and how smooth the skin is compared to some peaches. So there's Gold Dust. We have a June Crest. We have the Sun Crest. We have a Flavor Crest. So you can hear the crest. They're all somewhat related, but they're kind of mid-season fruit. And then the Alberta. Did I miss one? I don't know. It's pretty close. That's about 7.
So in the book, you talk about names of old friends, and I think we talked a little bit about this with the heirloom varieties, but talk a little bit about what heirloom varieties mean for peaches.
Well, I think what a lot of consumers don't realize is that as the years go on, the growers and the nurserymen are creating new varieties all the time. And what most often is found in the marketplace are newer varieties, which are designed to be very firm so that they hold up in refrigeration and shipping, and lipstick red color on the outside. Well, some of the older varieties of peaches aren't that red. The Alberta, for example, is very yellow looking on the outside. And there's nothing wrong with this fruit. Part of our goal with growing older varieties of fruit is, one, they all have a unique flavor. And if you lined up several varieties next to each other, you'd really enjoy the nuances. And some are more buttery flavor, and some are tangier, even if they're perfectly ripe. And what we love is to share with our consumers, our eaters of all ages, these older varieties, so that people have a palate for what the different flavors are. I think a lot of our younger kids and younger eaters think that peaches are supposed to be hard and crunchy. Well, traditionally, no, that's not the case. When a peach is ripe, it's actually relatively soft and sweet. And the idea of a crunchy peach for me is just, like fingers on a chalkboard. But as young people learn to eat those, that's what they're aware of. And so part of our passion is to educate people about the nuances with peaches and the varieties.
Awesome. I'm learning things from you today already, so you're passing it on already.
Oh, good.
This is probably a quick one, but cling and freestone. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is in those peaches?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, what we're talking about is the pit, the seed in the middle of the peach, and how readily it releases from the flesh of the fruit. So there are some fruit that if you cut around it and you attempt to open it, will just very easily come apart and the pit just pops out. That's a free stone peach. The stone falls out freely, right? So as opposed to what a cling is, the cling is the fruit adheres to that pit. If you do any cooking and you know a mango, for example, you know what that's like, that the fruit just sticks to the seed inside the mango. That's what a cling peach is like, is that you have to cut it off. It will never just slip right off. So some dishes lend themselves better to one type than others. If you like to work hard, then you're going to cut it off and you'll use a cling. If you're eating it free of hand, you can eat a cling. If you're trying to make nice, beautiful little slices, with the red inside portion that is next to the fruit, then you probably want a freestone so that it opens easily. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Part of the science of peaches.
We were talking about the different seasons of your peaches. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between early, mid, and late peaches? Is it just the peach that we get, or is there something we should know about eating any peach throughout the season?
Well, I think in California, because we're in California, we're going to talk about California fruit. So typically the season for peaches in California is May through September. So the earlier fruit is not going to have as much time to mature and develop sugars. So typically, earlier fruit are not quite as sweet or as sugary as the mid-season or later season fruit. And again, it just depends on the variety in terms of the sweet-tart ratio and or what other particular characteristics the fruit might have. It's like, if you had a Chardonnay wine, but 6 different versions of Chardonnay, you're still going to have a spectrum of, some sweeter and some's more a drier flavor. So similar with fruit.
Okay, well, let's kind of a little segue into something else we were going to talk about, the regionality of peaches. Can you talk a little bit about not just the California, but peaches other places, and a little bit about the climates and microclimates and the terroir that does add these different flavors to the peaches?
Sure. Well, I have to say I've been a Californian all my life. So, there might be people in the audience or viewers that are from Georgia or Michigan or Pennsylvania or other states that grow peaches. And I can't speak to those peaches. But I will tell you that the soil and the climate will make a difference as to, one, what kind of varieties will grow well there, and two, what the flavor is going to be. I mean, even on our farm, on our 80 acres, if we plant the same variety on one end of the 80 acres versus the other end, if the soil type is different, the flavors of the peaches will be somewhat different. And it'll also depend on fertilizers and other cultural practices. But peaches are one of those fruit that are very kind of adaptable to the environment. So what's beautiful about the Central Valley, where we live, is it's very hot, dry climate. Peaches love hot, dry climate. Now, if you're in Georgia, it's hot, but it's not always dry. So there probably would be other varieties that grow better in that environment than here in California.
Interesting. You just, I said, part of what I see at the grocery store is the same thing you were talking about, where even doesn't matter what store you go into, unless you go to an actual farmer's market, you're going to see white and yellow peach and not really realize that there are as many varieties of them as there are. Can you talk a little bit about ripeness in a peach? What are we looking for when we're looking for ripeness?
Ripeness. Well, first off, the first question that I ask when I'm even trying to determine the ripeness I want is, what am I going to do with it? So if I'm wanting to make a sauce, if I'm wanting to make jam, I want a really what we call a gusher. I want a fruit that is so ready to go that when you bite into it, the juice just squirts out, of your mouth. You don't always find that in the grocery store, though. So again, this is where if you know a grower or have somebody at a farmer's market that can give you tree ripened fruit, and then if you want to leave it out for a while, then it'll even be riper. If you want something that's going to be crunchy, if you want that tartness in your salad, you might want a greener fruit. So what I look for in ripeness is two things: how it feels and what we call the background color. So the feel of the fruit is critical. Remember those old commercials about, I think there was a brand of toilet paper where, you know, they're talking about how it feels, how soft it feels. And in a way, if you're looking for the right fruit, you do need to gingerly feel that fruit with your fingertips, with just the pads of your fingertips. Now, as you're squeezing that fruit gently, if your fingertips sink into that fruit, you know that that is ripe, and you'd better take that one home with you because you just left your fingerprints on it too. And probably the next person isn't going to want it, but that's the fruit that I love that is really, really soft. So the ripeness, if it feels hard to the touch, I mean hard like a baseball, leave it. It may never get ripe. But the second thing that you'd look for is what we call the background color. So if you're looking at the stem end of your fruit, of course the stem, there is no stem. It's not like an apple. You know, an apple, the stem's always in the apple. But when you pick a peach, the stem remains on the tree. But if you're looking at the stem end, the color around that end is going to give you a really good indicator of how ripe that peach is. If there are green tinges to that, it's green. It's not quite ripe. What I look for is a golden yellow kind of back color to that. Almost like some of these chairs here, not the green ones, but the golden ones here. You'd want to look for that background color for ripeness. If it's yellow, kind of a neutral yellow, it'll probably ripen on your counter. Refrigeration is not good for peaches. It's like tomatoes, you know. One, it'll stop the ripening, and maybe that's what you want. But if they've been refrigerated too long, they're going to become mushy and mealy and dehydrated. The best peaches are those that are left on the counter and can ripen on your windowsill.
What's a little segue? I was going to ask you what we should know about storing and ripening peaches, and maybe not just about what we as consumers do, but what other producers do, you know, when they don't actually ripen fruit on the tree.
Yeah, well, traditionally, peaches are always hand-picked. It's the one of the products that's not machine-picked yet at this point in time. They're hand-picked. Conventionally, if you're talking big growers, and oftentimes they're picked very green. They're dumped into big bins. They go to the packing house. They're dumped out. They roll down the conveyor belts and are sorted and sized all mechanically and boxed into double or triple layer boxes, refrigerated, held under refrigeration for who knows how long, really, because in California, our produce is shipped all across the country. Well, the longer it's in refrigeration, the more likely it's going to dehydrate, and the more likely it will never ripen if it's been under long-term refrigeration. The riper the fruit is, of course, the more gingerly you need to handle it. So for the specialty packed fruit that we do, for example, we pick them by hand, put them in a box that are at most double layer high, so that they're not laying on top of each other and pressuring each other. We hand pick that peach out of the what we call the pick box. Examine it for flaws or blemishes, and place it single layer into a box that's got dividers in it so that they're not rolling around, and that goes straight to our buyers, and are usually in the marketplace the next day or the day after. So because they're not refrigerated long, they might be cooled down to kind of slow down the ripening process, but if they're ready tree ripen, you want people to get those in their hands right away.
That's great. So, and when we get home, either storing them on the counter if they're not quite ripe, or if they really are, just go at them and eat them right away, right?
Well, the best thing is if they're ripe, eat them, use them right away. Now, if you can't and you want to slow down the ripening because they're especially ripe, put them in the refrigerator, but but get them out of the refrigerator soon. Don't leave them in there for a week or so. You want to use their peaches when they're at their peak. So, the less time in refrigeration, the better.
I was reading through the book, and it talked about the chill hours. And can you explain a little bit what that means to the peaches?
Yeah, we like to think of chill hours, which is during the dormancy season, during the winter. So different varieties of peaches actually require so many hours of temperatures below 45 degrees, so around 800 hours over the winter from October to February or so, which allows the tree to really get some rest. I mean, what we like to call it is, a good solid sleep. When you've been working hard, a long stretch, if you don't get a good solid sleep sooner or later, you're going to wake up grumpy. And you might not be as productive as you'd like to be. So with our peaches, they really need a nice solid winter to rest, to sleep, cold temperatures. This winter, we had kind of a warm winter, so hopefully the season will be good this year. Typically, if they've got a good solid 800 hours of cold temperatures, the flavors tend to be better during the year. So, we'll see. It's been so dry, also, that we've noticed that the soils are just sucking up the moisture now. We've watered more frequently than we have ever in our last 30 years, and just with the drought and the dryness, those trees are just inhaling the water that they get.
So the last chapter in your book, you were talking about preservation. You want to talk a little bit about what goes into that, or why you see the value of preserving foods?
Right. One of the things while we were working on this cookbook was, we basically were asked to get the book done in 18 months. And we asked our publishers to stretch it over to 2 years so that we would have 2 full harvest seasons to test recipes. And why is that important? Because it was important to us because during the winter months, when we went to the grocery store and bought produce that came from South America, because that was the only place that produce was being harvested at that time. But by the time they got to our market, and by the time I got them home, at least 4 out of 5 I was throwing away. They were mealy, they were brown, they looked fine on the outside, but you cut into them and you really did not want to eat them. So that's kind of part of the backstory. The other part is I grew up on a farm myself. My folks were from the Midwest and good Depression era folks, and learned how to preserve all types of foods. And so at an early age, I learned how to can. And I brought some examples here today if anybody wants to take a look. But so some of the things that you can do with peaches, canning, this is probably a pretty typical idea of a jarred. I guess people today are calling it a jarred, but a half type of peach. I also have done and included recipes for pickled peaches, which are a great a great accompaniment. But this is like these are whole peaches that have some spices in them, but they're during the winter time. Oh, it's so lovely to if you Thanksgiving have turkey with a pickled peach next to it, and it just reminds you of summertime, and it's just so delightful. Also, then I've got some other, kind of California-style recipes. There's a peach salsa, which a peach and tomato salsa, which is also a treat. And then I've got some chutney, which is a spiced kind of chopped peach with raisins in it. I include dark raisins because that's what we grow. So that's a lot of fun. But what we wanted to encourage people through the cookbook is to, if you have access to good fruit, then why not do something with it so you can enjoy it year round. So we've also included how to dehydrate your peaches if you want to do that, or how to freeze the peaches. It's so easy. It's really easy. And if you've never canned before, do not be afraid of canning. It's a pretty easy process. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Is there anyone who has any questions out here today for us?
So when peach season comes around, I always try to pay attention at Berkeley Bowl for the Masumoto peaches. But I'm wondering, do you have any kind of email notification that you send out, or do you ship
good.
directly now?
Oh, that's a good question. So she was asking, she shops at Berkeley Bowl, which happens to be one of our really terrific long-time markets that we've worked with. And we do ship directly to Berkeley Bowl. And those peaches are the ones that I and my daughter have hand-packed. So you're pretty lucky to get some. But yeah, if you want to log on to our website, we do have a newsletter. And my daughter also tweets when the fruit's going to be delivered here in the East Bay. And so you can find out then when it's arriving to Berkeley Bowl or a few other places. And if you're someplace else, I mean, because we're too small to be shipping things by the huge lots, but we're too big to know where all of our fruit is going. So if you happen to be at some other market and you see the Masumoto fruit and let us know, then we can tweet it out to other folks too that, oh, it showed up over at this market in this city.
My last question for you is,
Sure.
How was your day here at Google? Tell me a little bit about what it was like for you seeing our cafe in action and how our chefs cooked up peaches to your recipes and their own recipes, and just what was your day like?
Oh, I was so delighted. From the moment I walked in the door today, it was just really a delightful day from the chefs and the staff in the cafe. And what they did was beautiful. I mean, they made some recipes directly from the book. They also took some and tweaked them, which is exactly what a recipe is. You know, it's like a guideline, right? You know, so take an idea and then go with it. And the fact that here we are in April and they found some peaches and did some pretty remarkable things with those. They also used some of our dried peaches, and that was a real treat. It's totally amazing to me what happens here at Google and how lucky all of you are. I mean, that the care that goes into the selection of the food and the preparation. And I know Bon Appetit Management Company helps oversee food service and their commitment to high quality food because it's nourishing the body, the soul, the mind. It's not just food. It's, I think that food is a special thing because you take it in to your body, and what could be more personal than that? And the fact that a company this size cares so much about their employees to provide not only some food but great food, and it was cooked to perfection. I was so mind-boggled. It's really wonderful. What a great opportunity.
Well, awesome. It was really great having you out here today, Marcy. Pleasure to meet you. I look forward to hunting my farmers markets and wherever I can to find your peaches this summer. And have a great rest of your day. And really, thanks for coming out here today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.